Welcome to The Explainer. We're diving into a really interesting economic puzzle today, based on some great reporting from the Wall Street Journal. The big question is, why is it suddenly so much harder to get a loan in Europe? All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at this unexpected squeeze on businesses. Then, we'll trace the breadcrumbs back to see what's causing it globally. We'll zoom in on how this is playing out in a major European country, unpack the really tough spot policymakers are in, and, most importantly, talk about why this whole story actually matters to you. So, this whole thing really kicked off with a surprise toward the end of last year. It was something that, honestly, most economists didn't see coming. A new survey dropped from the European Central Bank, that's the ECB, and it showed that all of a sudden, banks started getting way stricter about lending money to businesses. In simple terms, they just made it a lot harder for companies to get the cash they need to, expand and hire. And this was a real head-scratcher. I mean, the central bank had spent the last year doing everything it could to make borrowing cheaper to get the economy going. So what gives? Why are banks suddenly hitting the brakes? While digging into that survey, it's pretty clear. The banks are getting nervous about where the economy is headed. They're just not willing to take on as much risk, especially when it comes to businesses tied up in what's happening outside of Europe. And the bottom line, a lot more companies are getting their loan applications rejected. Okay, so to get why the banks are so cautious, we've got to look beyond Europe. There are actually three big global pressures at play here. And before we connect those dots, let's just quickly get on the same page with a few key terms. It'll make everything else click into place. First, tariffs. Super simple. Think of them as an extra tax or a fee that a government sticks on products coming in from another country. The whole point is to make those imported goods more expensive. Next up, inflation. You already know this one. It's why that cup of coffee or a tank of gas costs more today than it did a year ago. And for context, the European Central Bank, their big goal is to keep inflation right around a steady 2%. And number three, interest rates. This is just the cost of borrowing money. So when a central bank cuts interest rates, they're basically trying to put the economy on sale, making it cheaper to borrow and encouraging everyone to spend a little more. All right, so with those terms in mind, here's where it gets really interesting. What's happening is that trade policies from the US are sending these huge ripples across the ocean. European companies are basically getting caught in a pincer movement. On one side, those US tariffs make their products more expensive for Americans. And on the other side, they're getting hit with a flood of super cheap goods from China right in their own backyard. Okay, so these are big global ideas, right? Let's bring it down to earth and see how this actually plays out for real people and businesses. We're going to zoom in on France, which is the second biggest economy in the Eurozone. So just take a look at this. You can see pretty clearly that France's economic growth has been slowing down for 2 years straight. In fact, it hit its slowest point since the pandemic. That's a huge red flag that something is really gumming up the works. And here's how that chain reaction we talked about actually works. Those US tariffs make it harder for France to sell its stuff overseas. Meanwhile, more and more stuff is being imported into France. You add that trade slowdown to the fact that people in France are also spending less, and well, the whole economy starts to drag. So you've got nervous banks, intense pressure from global trade, and slowing growth. All of this puts the European Central Bank in a really, really tough spot. Remember, the ECB's whole job is to keep the economy on an even keel, mostly by managing inflation. But here's the catch. Their main tools, like changing interest rates, are like using a wrench on a European engine. They work great for problems inside Europe, but they're not so useful when the storm clouds are rolling in from somewhere else. And this is the classic rock and a hard place scenario they're in. On one side, you've got slowing growth and banks that are scared to lend. That screams, cut interest rates, help the economy. But on the other side, those global pressures are already pushing inflation down below their 2% target. If they cut rates now, they could push it down even further. And that risks something called deflation, a nasty cycle of falling prices that's really hard to get out of. And check out this number, 8%. That might not sound huge, but that's how much of all business lending across the Eurozone is tied up in sectors that are super exposed to what the US does with trade. That's a big deal. And it's exactly why those banks we talked about are getting so skittish. And hey, don't just take it from me. The ECB themselves said it. They basically said, look, things might be okay on our own turf, but these, quote, persistent external headwinds, that's their fancy term for it, are making the whole situation really fragile.
Okay, so I know this can all feel a bit abstract. Central banks, global trade. So let's bring it home. Why should any of this matter to you? Well, it actually hits a lot closer to home than you might think.
I mean, think about it like this. When banks get tight with money, that small business down the street can't get a loan to expand. That means they're not hiring anyone new. Or when that big factory on the edge of town can't sell its products to the US anymore, that could mean layoffs. These huge global economic shifts have a direct line to jobs and businesses right in your own neighborhood.
All right, let's pull all this together. If you're going to walk away with just 3 key things from all this, here's what they should be. So there you have it. It's a perfect storm, really. You've got a local problem, it's hard to get a loan, that's being caused by these massive global forces. And all of that leaves the people in charge, the policymakers, with a really tough puzzle to solve. And that really leaves us with one big question to chew on, doesn't it? As the whole world gets more and more connected, who's really in the driver's seat of your local economy?